Yeah, well, my first job actually was on a mini series in South Carolina called Chiefs. And I was in college, didn't know what I was doing, walked in for my first job interview to a film office wearing a three-piece suit, carrying a briefcase. Thought that was the professional thing to do.
Yes.
Looked like a total idiot. Had spoken to somebody and they had said, well, we're going to be filming in a couple of months. And so, come back or whatever. So when I was out of school for the summer, still didn't have a job. So I went down there to just see if I could get a job. And I just came up with this idea on the way down there that I had recently moved from Chapel Hill back to Gastonia for the summer. And so I just walked into the office and I said, I need to find out when I'm supposed to start work. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I recently moved. And I said, y'all have probably been trying to reach me to let me know when my job is starting. And I said, you didn't know how to find me. And so I just wanted to find out what day I'm supposed to start work. And so I saw this guy going around the office talking to people and pointing at me, and everybody shaking their head no, like we have no idea who this guy is. And so eventually he called me in an office. He said, look, nobody promised you a job, did they? I said, no, look, I'm just a college kid. I'm just wanting to get into the business. I'll be a PA. I'll do whatever. So then why he asked me this next question and thought I would give an honest answer, I don't know. But he said, can you drive trucks? Sure, no problem.
Ever driven a truck?
Never driven a truck before. So next thing I know, I'm driving like this 35-foot motorhome, and I'm driving Charlton Heston's motorhome. And so I'm his driver for like the next 10 weeks.
It's like how I spent my summer vacation.
I wasn't briefed properly on this subject.
Today I have the pleasure of talking with the Griffin brothers, location managers and Wilmington Film Commissioner. Yes? Is that the right title?
Yeah,
Yes.
director of the film office.
But both of you have your background in locations.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, I started here in Wilmington in 1984 on Cat's Eye. That was my first project here. I had a film I did, or a TV series I did prior to that in 1983, and that's in South Carolina. And that was what kind of got me interested in things. And so then they were building the studio here in 84. I was still in college. And so my college roommate and I came down to see if we could get a job. And so we got a job as drivers working on Cat's Eye.
Uh-huh.
And then went back to school, finished up, and then moved here when I graduated in 85. And within a couple of weeks, I had a job doing craft service on Blue Velvet. And then from there, got into doing locations and then worked in the business on that side for 15 years.
I was actually in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I was working in television and kind of marketing and advertising, and had always had a love for film. And Johnny was already in Wilmington working, so I knew kind of what was going on down there. And I thought, hey, if there's an opportunity, actually, I thought, God, if he can get a job.
That's how little you thought of your little brother.
If he
huh?
The older, the smarter one. He can certainly get a job.
If he can get a job, then anything's possible. So I reached out to Johnny, and by then he had moved out of the world of driving, and he was doing locations, and he was working on weeds. You were locations on that, weren't you?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That was a fast climb for you.
We all just kind of moved up quickly. And I mean, God bless her, Martha and Dino worked for them early on, and they gave you a shot. And like I said, I was doing locations early on.
to that point, Johnny finished doing Cat's Eye. He had a year left of college, and of course the higher ups in production down here were all folks that Dino brought. So they were all British.
Right,
They were Italian.
right.
Half of them couldn't speak English, or if they spoke it, they spoke it poorly. And they were like, John, you come and make a movies with us. And he's like, hey, this is true. And he said, I got one more year of college. And they're like, okay, well, you come when you finish, come on back. So I thought, well, there's an opportunity for me too, and I wanted to kind of make that switch from TV to film. So I spoke to Johnny. I said, hey, if you speak to your transportation coordinator, and if there's something that I can slide into. So Johnny said, yeah, Lee Seiler was the transportation coordinator.
Yep.
And I was actually going back and forth between Wilmington and Greensboro. I still had my job there. I had a great employer. She said, you can leave with a day's notice. So
Oh, wow,
I
that's
kept
great.
working in Greensboro, and then I finally got that second call right around the holidays, and they're like, there's a spot open, come on down. So the first day of work, they're like, I lived in an apartment complex on Carr Avenue,
Okay.
and they're like, we're shooting the Alberta Inn. Can you be there? It was pouring down rain. It was cold. I was like, yeah, I can be there. I don't think I had a raincoat. I borrowed my wife's rain jacket.
Wow.
And drove up there, and they put me in a van. And that was my first day of work.
Wow.
When I moved from transpo to locations, and I would be scouting, and a producer and director, production executive, somebody would come into Wilmington to look around. They always said, regardless of what the locations were they needed, they would say, can you run us by the beach? Because they
wanted to look at it?
They want to see where they might live.
I did it just last week with some folks that were scouting, and I mean it's invariably like, yeah, they want to see the beach. Maybe they've never seen an East Coast beach if they're from the West Coast, or it's just you want to go see it. There's just, I mean, it's magical. That's why we all live here.
We did work together on, I think, one project.
Yeah,
Is that right?
Ramblin' Rose was the only project we worked together on. The first location project I worked on was CBS. I was assistant manager for David Hartley,
Oh, okay.
and it was a CBS movie of the week called Too Young the Hero, starring Ricky Schroeder. How I met David, I was driving on a miniseries for CBS called Windmill of the Gods.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Again, one of those deals where, yeah, can you drive this? Actually, I drove the DP. I was the DP's driver, and it was my job at the end of wrap every day to fix his drink.
Okay.
And the trick was, and he made a deal out of this, the trick was to figure out when we were going to wrap. So I could hand him he drank Johnny Walker Red.
Okay.
And I had to hand him his drink when they were on the last shot. So I would really have to pay attention.
But that was your only job, was to be his driver?
Yeah, pretty much. But we just finished that. I wasn't doing anything, and somebody said, "Hey, Track 29, a Nick Rogue film, was shooting." And they were shooting down at the old Atlantic Coastline Railroad, right? And doing this big fair, this railroad fair. And it had not been renovated yet. And those warehouses were full of junk.
Just packed.
Railroad ties, old windows.
Literally railroad supplies.
It was
warehouses,
terrible. It was terrible. And they wanted them emptied out.
To use them.
Yeah.
For the show.
And of course, the tracks had not been used, so I got hired along with another driver since we had just finished showing. We didn't have a job, and David had gotten married and was on his honeymoon. So Welch Lambeth, the transportation coordinator, hired me and another driver to go down there, and we got those 30 cubic yard dumpsters, and we would fill one up, and we would call and say, "Bring us another," and then they would have us dig out the tracks to make them look like they were used.
Oh,
and we did that in the dead of summer. And at one point I looked at Todd and I said, whatever they're paying us, it's not enough. And I said, we're not working anymore until we get this sorted out. And David had just gotten back from his honeymoon. So this is the first time I met Hartley, and he comes in, "What's going on?" He says, "You guys aren't working." I said, "We're not going to do another piece of work until we get paid what we should be getting paid." So his very next show, he hired me as assistant manager.
Is that right?
I would always tell people that, you know what, you can give a construction coordinator a set of plans, drawing,
Right.
They can build it.
Yep.
They can build anything. But if you're telling me what you want me to go and find, I'm not building it. I'm not creating it. All I can do is find you the best representation of what you want. But I was doing this picture up in the mountains of North Carolina once called Winter People.
Oh, I worked with Bobby Huber on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. miserable up there in the
Miserable.
wintertime and the snow and the mud and
Yep.
the ice and all. So our director on that, when we were scouting, he wanted the picture took place, and I think it was like the 1920s, 1930s, Appalachia. And there was this one location that was supposed to be a house, a cabin, log cabin on the top of a ridge. And there was a story point where if you looked off on one side of the ridge, you saw North Carolina, and you looked off on the other side of the ridge and you saw Tennessee.
Right.
But he wanted and the house is literally on top of the ridge. And he wanted a stream to run beside the cabin down off the mountain. Well, I mean, my first thought was like, okay, well, streams don't run on the top of mountains.
Right.
I mean, so let's talk about this story here and it was a story point though, because there was this scene that took place where there was a fight in this stream outside the house. This guy gets wet, he gets cold, and so it was a story point. We kind of figure out how we had to deal with that.
Right.
And so I made the mistake of basically looking at him and saying, well, that doesn't exist. And all of a sudden, he just kind of bucked up at me, and he turned and he like pointed to a mountaintop, and he's like, have you been on top of that mountain over there? I said, well, no, sir, I haven't. He's like, okay, well, how about this one over here? Have you been on top of that mountain? And I said, no. And then he looked at me and he said, well, then you cannot tell me that it doesn't exist if you haven't been out there and tried to look for it.
Wow.
So I go back to the producer, and I'm like, what do you want to do? And he's like, well, it's too early in the process for us to push back and just start saying no.
Right.
We've got to try and achieve something here. And
Sure.
I'm like, yeah, but what? I mean, this is ridiculous. He's like, look, we just got to do it. So I get a helicopter. I call down to Asheville, where the closest helicopter was. I call this pilot. I knew I'd scouted with him some before. Booked him for 2 days. He flew up to where we were, landed on this high school football field, and I went out to meet him, and we got on the helicopter. He's like, all right, what are we looking for today? And I told him, and he had that same strange look on his face like, what do you mean? We're not going to find that. And I said, look, I know, but here's the deal. I'm hiring you for 2 days. It's October in the mountains of North Carolina. The leaves are beautiful. It's like, let's go enjoy ourselves.
Yeah.
So
And I'll be able to say, I hired a helicopter to look.
Exactly. So for 2 days, we flew the mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee.
In October.
Taking picture. Oh, it was beautiful.
Oh, my
like
God.
going up the Blue Ridge Parkway
yeah.
and around Grandfather Mountain and everywhere. And it was just beautiful. I was having a blast.
I know you were.
We'd sit down, we'd get some fuel, we'd get some lunch, go to the bathroom, then we'd get up and go fly again for a few hours. Did it again the second day, came back, had rolls and rolls of film of all these mountaintops. And I sit down with the director and I start to go through everything, and I, show him, saying, well, here we saw this. He's like, yeah, but I don't see a stream. I'm like, well, yeah, that's right. There is no stream. So I'll show you another mountain. So showed him another mountain. He's like, well, I still don't see any streams. I'm like, yeah, we didn't find any. And he's like, okay, well, now I know that you're telling the truth because you've been out there, you've done the work. And it's like, okay, sometimes that's what you have to do.
I was location manager on season 1 of Bolden.
Oh, yes.
So,
yes.
And if you know about Bolden,
Yeah,
then you get
that's-
the joke.
Yes, I do.
Right, you get the joke.
Yes, I came
So-
in late on season 1.
Okay. So, and the opening of the film, Buddy is in the insane asylum, and he's listening on the radio to a concert by Louis Armstrong. And we cut away from that to the real concert, and it's supposed to be at a roadhouse in New Orleans. And of course, at that time, only white folks could be inside. So all the black folks and mulattoes and all those folks could only listen to the show outside, either on a transistor radio or the roadhouse was set off from a levee.
Okay.
So people would sit. So hundreds of people would sit on the levee.
Oh, wow.
And sit outside the roadhouse and listen to the music as it wafted, across
Right.
the air. So they wanted to recreate that. So they said, find us a levee.
Here.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So find us a levee. And I was like, well, again, we're at sea level. And a levee, it has to be kind of higher. And so I said, I'm really not sure what that looks like. But maybe somewhere in Brunswick County. You just, whenever you know it's not in New Hanover County, then you just go and you cross the river and
That's
go to
right.
Brunswick County. Right?
It's a whole different world. It looks just the same.
So at that time, the development out there wasn't what it is now, but
Right.
but it was just beginning. So
Oh.
Waterford had just been built.
Okay.
The beginnings of it. All the residential was being built out, but all the commercial had yet to really come into existence. And we were driving out there, and they had built this humongous berm that separated what was going to be the commercial parcels from the residential.
Oh, for crying out loud.
And we're like, well, maybe, and you couldn't see the houses. And
Right.
we didn't want to see over
That's right.
the berm. We wanted the berm to be the
Sure.
the
And
levee,
they're just sitting
right?
on the incline
Yeah.
of the
so
berm.
so I reached out to the developers, and they were just getting ready to plant a stand of pine trees that would
In that
continue to create the buffer. So I said, don't do it. I said, I need a bare landscape. So we cut a deal with them and kind of rented that area and said, well, don't plant the trees until
Yeah.
until we're done. And then we went and we measured off where the roadhouse was to be.
Okay.
They eventually shot a plate of an actual roadhouse in New Orleans.
Okay.
So we measured off where the house is going to be. Then we planted a front yard, like 100 by 200, planted grass in the spring, and we had our greens people watered it every day for like 2 months. Oh my gosh! Yeah. So then we built a road at the edge of the lawn at the base of the berm, right? And that was and so when we shot it, we dropped a giant green screen behind where the house was to sit.
Right.
We had a walkway that bisected through the middle of the front lawn with gas lamp poles.
Right.
Right. And the house never existed.
Right.
Right. And we had like 400, 500, I swear, extras
500
out there to populate
on that berm.
Yes. Yes, and we had period cars. We had period cars. I had a base camp. We had over 30 makeup and hair stations.
I would think so.
They gave us the electrics. Just gave us our own package. It said, "You guys set it up," right? Because they couldn't deal with
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. It's so much extra work.
Tents galore.
Oh my God.
Bathrooms for all those people, and then just days before we were to shoot it. One of those March nor'easters, late March, came through and tore down all of our tents. So I had to get L&L back out there with new tents, replace everything, and we shot that sequence over 2 nights, 500 extras a night.
Wow.
We'd start at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they'd getting people ready,
Right.
and they'd bring the extras in waves, and we'd shoot all night next to Highway 17.
Wow.
And we'd wrap it, and we'd wrap when the sun came up. I think that's the only piece of footage
that you see in
that was used in season 1. I started on that movie in October of 2007, I think. And when I was doing my final petty cash, I remember looking at the date, and I said, that date's really familiar. And I looked, and it was a year to the day that I started working on that movie, and that was the only scene that we shot that made the final cut.
Oh my gosh.
I wasn't briefed properly on the subject.
Chris Bromley called me the fall of 2006, 2007. He says, "Hey, I've got a script for a small independent film, this jazz movie." And he says, "It's pretty good, but the director's never directed before, and we're going to bring him into town and kind of work with him for a few days. Can you help us out with the location?" I said, "Yeah, what do you need?" He says, "Okay, we're going to shoot 2 scenes. We're going to shoot a scene in a cemetery, and then we need an office." So we wrangled Dan Scott's office on set from One Tree Hill, just to have
gotcha.
to give him a chance to be on a stage set.
Sure.
And then we shot the cemetery set over there at Bellevue, right around the corner.
Right.
They got it for nothing.
Right.
Right. And we went over there and we shot that scene. Steve Thompson handle the lighting. I was over there. There was like maybe 4 of us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then we went. We sent him over to the stage, and that was that was his first time behind the director's first time behind the camera
ever.
And then a few weeks later, Chris called me back up. He said they're making the movie, and I was like, okay,
Here we go.
here we go. And and it
10 years later.
it bears to be stated. There'll be some folks who don't know when we talk about season 1 to season 2. The movie was shot and reshot about 2 or 3 different times. We always joke that was like the next.
It was
season.
originally Anthony Mackie.
Yes.
And then by the time Dan got around to wanting to do reshoots, Anthony was
He had blown up.
he'd blown
He
up,
moved on, yeah.
and so all of a sudden this other actor comes in on season 3, I guess, or 4.
4, I think.
Season 4. Probably the most unique thing we ever had here in terms of
Kind of feels like
well,
it.
and how long it took.
Right.
You know, and
He was and Pritzker was okay with it. He was like,
What-
I mean, he went through multiple editors.
oh yeah.
It was his project to do what he wanted
his
to do.
money.
you know?
And that was kind of the beauty for him, was having that luxury.
But on the call sheets, it was like, day 110 out of 65, day 111 out of 65. And it was
They built a connective alley, if you will,
To stage
between
3, yeah.
between stage 3 and stage 4,
Yep.
and we put in 400 tons. We had 400 tons of air conditioning. I had a chiller that sat back behind the old special effects building that we'd crank up every morning in 45 minutes. And we shot this in the dead of summer.
Oh, yeah.
And it was 115 degrees outside
Yes.
with the heat index. And I put thermometers on either end of stage 4.
Yeah.
And within 45 minutes, I had it 55 degrees.
I remember, we used to joke about Dan, when he would go to lunch and he'd come back and he'd have a new inspiration.
have an idea. Yeah.
Oh, he'd say, I had a dream. He'd come in the following morning and say, I had a dream.
Right.
And the first was Bruce Moriarty.
Oh, gosh. Oh, yeah.
Who has seen everything.
Everything and
And
then
did a
some.
lot here in Wilmington in the early days.
He sure did.
Yeah. But his resume is unparalleled and just a fantastic first AD. And I would see him sitting in his chair on stage, and he had that ubiquitous toothpick.
Yes.
Right? And he'd be gnawing on that toothpick in his head, and his head would be in his hands. And he'd be trying to figure out how to make the board work. I always give the same answer, and everybody rolls their eyes when I say it. I think Johnny knows what I'm going to say. Piranha 3 Double D.
That was the most fun I ever had in my life.
Yeah.
We were at the water park for
Yeah.
most of it. And-
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
And
But
for you, too.
you know what? Johnny laid the groundwork as the director of the film office because they were looking for somewhere. The producers needed a water park.
Gotcha.
Right. I mean, it was pretty specific. You had, if you didn't have a water park, you couldn't make the movie.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And I know that they had looked. If my memory serves me, they looked down in Louisiana, I think. Not sure where else they looked, but they reached out to Johnny, and so Johnny had the initial meetings with the folks at Jungle Rapids.
Right.
And the whole premise was we can shoot this before your season opens, prior to Memorial Day weekend.
Right.
And so they were, so kudos to Johnny for making that happen, but also kudos to the owners of Jungle Rapids because they didn't know what was asked of them.
Right.
But they said, okay, we're gonna hold hands, and we're gonna walk through this, and we're gonna make it happen. And now they were paid. I know what that number was.
Yep.
But still not fully understanding
what
we were going to ask of them. They were pretty brave.
Yeah.
Sometimes the filmmakers have a version. They have their own version of what it's going to be.
Right.
Right. And everybody else has a different version of what
That's
it's gonna
right.
be. these guys knew exactly what they were making. They had no illusions of what it was.
That's right. That's right.
Right? So they were like, okay, let's have fun.
Oh.
Let's have fun. And if you can't have fun shooting 3 weeks at a water park.
Oh, my God.
You know, now it got a little chilly there leading up.
It did.
Because it was,
It
we were
did.
shooting in it was still.
Yeah, it was early.
We had hot
Yeah.
tubs there to put people in
Right.
that started suffering from hypothermia.
I remember.
Right? But so, and we were real creative in our locations because they didn't have a ton of money. So we were looking for ways to combine things and be smart about things.
Right.
And nobody took us seriously, and we certainly didn't take ourselves seriously. And then the icing on the cake was David Hasselhoff.
Oh, my God.
First of all, so if you remember, the whole premise is the piranhas get into the system of this water park on the weekend of their opening, right?
That's right.
So,
That's
and
right.
they hire David Hasselhoff as like the celebrity who's going to be there at the opening, and they hire him as his Baywatch persona.
Right.
So David Hasselhoff is playing himself as Baywatch, right? And so David Hasselhoff, the actor, understands why he's there.
No
Right.
kidding.
Right?
No kidding.
And so he plays it exactly how you would expect. He's like, I'm here just to collect a paycheck.
Yes. Yes.
I'm tired. I'm hungover.
Yes. Yes.
And I just want to do this and
get
go,
out of
and get out. And the first day he shows up on set at Jungle Rapids, his driver slash assistant, they hop out of the car, and his driver assistant goes to the trunk, and he brings out handfuls of T-shirts
That's right.
to give all the crew.
That's
and
right.
It's this huge picture of David Hasselhoff,
That's right.
and it says, "Don't hassle the Hoff."
That's right.
We opened the first scene with him is actually he's in a motel room with like two girls.
Yeah.
Right. And he's hungover. He's got his portable keyboard, right? Because he's probably writing some great song that's going to sell him 1 million copies in Germany.
Yeah. Right.
Right?
Huge hit in Germany. Yeah.
And he's like, I don't want to be here, and I'm just using these girls and everything. And we shot that at the Moran Motel down at Curry Beach. And he would come out on the balcony, and there would be people outside across the street with signs, "We love you, David."
Yep.
And all this stuff. And he would go out there and he would wave at them.
He would.
And he was
He'd give 'em a few
excited
minutes.
about
Yep.
to see him, and they were excited to see him. And it was just the craziest thing I'd ever seen.
No, the king of self-promotion.
Yeah.
And but a very kind version of that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He really did appreciate his fans.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
And you felt it.
Everybody got along. We had the resources that we needed to do what they wanted to do,
Yeah.
and everybody was just super chill.
That's great.
No egos.
That's great.
One of the producers was from Scotland County, I think,
Yeah.
Oh,
North Carolina.
Really?
Around Aberdeen, Laurinburg, that area.
Film Glory down in Savannah, Georgia.
what a beautiful film.
Yeah, and that was it was a great cast, amazing cast.
Amazing.
Freddie Francis, I think, was the DP, and
Yeah.
might have been nominated for an award. Freddie Fields, prolific producer, was involved. And it was just an amazing. It was a great story. Growing up in the South, and the story of the Civil War, and the 54th Massachusetts all-black colored troops that fought, and to do just a massive period picture like
Yeah.
that, where you had to go in and you had to put dirt everywhere to cover the streets. You had to change everything. You've got thousands of extras doing these battle sequences.
No, it was epic. It was an
Yeah.
epic film.
Yeah, I mean, and it so much of that film was not about the locations. Obviously, we had to find locations, but it was about the support that it took to, okay, we're going to do a scene, and we've got 1,500 extras, so they've got to be fed. They've got to all go through wardrobe. We've got like 100 horses that travel with us everywhere we go. So everywhere we go, you've got to get a place
to put 100
put the
horses.
horses. You've got to get the feed. You got to get the water. You've got to get, somebody's got to clean up behind 100 horses every single day. So you've got a crew of people that do nothing but that. And just the logistics that were involved in it. But then again, to kind of look at what you did and the kind of project it was.
Right.
It was like, wow, this is kind of chilly.
Wow.
They shot the battle scenes, the big epic battle scenes on the beach on Jekyll Island.
Okay.
And I remember my wife and I took a mini vacation down to Savannah while he was working on the picture. So we were going to go by and see. And so we left Savannah to go to Jekyll Island. It was at night when we went.
Right.
And we got to that turn that you make to go straight onto Jekyll Island, and you could look in that direction, and you thought that there was a football stadium had been built on Jekyll Island because the Muscos,
We had the big Musco lights.
the Muscos were out there, and you could see it lit up from miles away.
Yeah, I'm sure
crazy.
from a boat out in the ocean, it must have been like, what is going? What am I looking at? Oh my gosh.
I mean, we built this massive fort. It was an earthen fort, and so it looked kind of like Fort Fisher, these big dunes, big mounds.
Yeah.
And so we literally went on the beach, and we spent months. We got all the permits and had to deal with the federal government and local government.
So you
and all
raised those walls.
Yeah, that was all
Wow.
bulldozers and sand, and we created. And then afterwards, we had to go in and create this whole environmental restoration plan. And we had to hire an engineering firm to monitor it for like a year and a half, and we had to put irrigation in and had to regrow the dunes and the grass and all of that.
Wow.
So it was
Oh,
quite
I see. You even went into the dunes.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
It's amazing you even got permission.
Yeah, I don't know that you could do that anymore.
I don't think so.
I'll tell you a funny story from that one. So we had obviously the North and the South, the two groups that are fighting. And so you had a core group of extras, and you actually gave them muskets, and they taught them how to put the black powder in there to take the ramrod and put it down, and then you'd put a firing cap on, and you'd pull the trigger, and you would fire the gun and get the flash,
Right.
like shooting a blank, if you will.
Right.
And so they taught all the extras how to do this, and there were certain ones in the foreground that they had to do that with. And so then we also had a lot of reenactors that had come in. We're doing this scene on the beach at the fort, and we've got the southern group who are just reenactors, and then we've got our northern troops, the 54th Regiment, who are our extras that are with us every single day and play this group in the film. And so all of a sudden, somebody got the idea that, you know what? If we load the gun with the black powder and then actually put some sand on top of it, we can fire it, and it's like getting hit with just scattershot. And so,
Oh my God!
so as the troops are
Just a reminder that these extras were from South Carolina.
yeah,
Or Georgia, they were Georgia.
Oh yeah, it all makes sense now. Go ahead.
they were people that we found that could work for the next 10 weeks, so they were unemployed.
Sure.
Wow. So anyway, they thought it would be this funny thing to do. So they're charging up the fort for this sequence, and they're pulling the trigger and like firing. And so everybody watching, the filming, you just see the flash and you think, oh, it's just a fake. All right, cut. Let's go again. And all the guys are like holding their faces, like, oh, what's going? And everybody's like, what's going on? And nobody, and then they're like, well, I got hit with something. They're like, well, it's impossible. It's like, there's nothing in the gun.
Right.
And then come to find out, these guys were like putting
Packing
sand in the gun and firing it at these other guys in their faces. So
I'm assuming nobody had any
the
serious
North
issues.
was trying to win. They were going to do it at all costs. So.
No kidding. Wow. Wow.
Damn Yankees.
And you get a little bit bored. You're out there all day long.
Yeah.
There's nothing
Sure.
to do. So you know what? You go up to the corner store and you buy a little, Richard Wild Irish Rose or whatever, and you put it in your canteen that's carried on your belt all day long.
Because when else are going to have that opportunity?
Right.
Because nobody carries
So you've
canteens.
basically got a flask on your hip, and all day long you're drinking from that flask. So by the end of the day, the extras are getting they're lit.
And they're getting some really good ideas.
Yeah. So next thing you know, it's like we're taking their guns away and we're giving them rubber ones. We're taking the canteens and like plugging the top on it so they can't put anything in it anymore. So it's like, I mean, none of those were my responsibilities, but they were just the fun things you got to observe on the set, you know.
Damn Yankees.
As a location person, especially back in those days, when you didn't have the internet to do a lot of research, you would call film commissioners. And I'd worked in several states, and the first thing you would always do would be to call up the film commissioner in that state and say, okay, here's what I'm looking for. I need these locations. I need help shutting down these roads. I need these permissions. I need some sort of a warehouse somewhere that we can build sets in. So you worked closely with the film commissioners.
Sure.
And so I'd worked with film commissioners in different states. Certainly, those of us, Vick and I, starting here in the industry before there was a film commissioner in Wilmington, when Mark came in, we obviously worked with him very closely. And he came here, I think, in about 1993 when the film office first started.
Okay.
And he stayed here through 99.
Can you talk a little bit about how that office was created?
Yeah, so the Wilmington Film Commission, we had the State Film Commission in Raleigh.
Right.
And there were folks here in Wilmington that just felt like with the surge in work that we had here in Wilmington, that we really needed a local film office here to help with permitting, to help with the process of recruiting films, and just being more of a local advocate here in the community instead of somebody in Raleigh that was 2 hours away. Right. And so through a combined effort of the Chamber of Commerce, the City of Wilmington, New Hanover County, they all came together and provided funding and started the organization through the Chamber of Commerce, and it was housed at the Chamber of Commerce.
I remember that. I do remember that.
Mark was hired. Beth Christensen,
Yep.
She used to work for the film office. She's a decorator now.
Yep.
She used to work at the film office with Mark. And so it was housed in the Chamber of Commerce for several years. And then in about 1996, I think, it actually moved to Screen Gem Studios and was housed here. The Chamber of Commerce had sort of incubated it for a while, and it was like, okay, now it's time for you to kind of grow and spread your wings and move out. So they actually moved over to Screen Gems.
And Mark was still
there.
Okay.
And then in 1999, the Film Commission formed its own entity. Instead of being part of the Chamber of Commerce, it became a standalone corporation.
Oh.
Still receives funding from the City of Wilmington, New Hanover County. We received money for a while from an organization called North Carolina Southeast, which was an economic development group in southeastern North Carolina.
Okay.
And so then it became its own corporation, a 501c6.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly after that, in 1999, Mark Strickland got an offer to go to, it was either the state of Washington or Oregon.
It was Oregon.
Oregon. To go run the film office there.
Oh.
And when he came here, prior to that, he had been in the state of Alabama as a film commissioner.
Oh, okay. So
he was somebody that had been around a little bit and worked in some different places. And I was starting to, I'd been in the business since 85.
Right.
Was working on bigger films, more films. And as locations, especially when you work out of town, you're like first man in, last man out.
Right.
And so a lot of jobs for me were, they would last 9 months.
Yeah. That can be exhausting.
And especially when you're doing locations, you're literally the first person that gets a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how many times I would get a call from a producer that would say, we just got out of a meeting. This project just got greenlit, and we need to be shooting in, 12 weeks.
Right.
And again, this was before the internet, so it's like, okay, we need somebody to go out and start finding locations, helping us determine, number one, what state are we going to do this in? And then number two, once we pick a location, a state or city, we've got to find all the different sets. And so you're the first one out the door.
Yeah.
And I did a picture in Africa once, and I got a call on a Tuesday saying, do you have a passport? And I said, no. And they said, well, we just FedExed you a plane ticket, so get a passport, get here, we start filming on Sunday. And so you would have to just sort of pack your bags and go.
Johnny would leave us with a stack of his checkbook and say, just pay my bills while I'm gone. And we would.
Yeah, Vick and his wife they just lived right around the corner from me. And it was just like, okay.
How convenient. How
look
nice.
after the house. Here's my checkbook. Just pay my bills while I'm gone. You know? So
wow. That's awesome.
But so I got to the point where it's like, okay, this was fun and this was nice, but it's like I'm really not wanting to kind of do that traveling anymore. And it was like every film you did, you then would start to do, like I said, bigger films and longer films.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a couple of producers that I worked with sort of regularly that would take me to different places where they were working. And so it finally got to the point where I was like, okay, you know what? I'm wanting to try and stay home more. When you worked on movies, you worked with film commissioners. And so I had worked from that side of the fence and knew what I liked about film commissioners, about the ones that really knew what they were doing.
Right.
And the ones that didn't, because they would come to the hotel to pick me up to scout locations in a stretch limo because I'm from Hollywood, in their opinion. And it's like, no, this isn't the way we do it. I'm just a location manager.
Yeah.
So
and I need something that'll go down a dirt road.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Yep.
So you kind of learn what was best practices and what you liked and what you didn't like. And so I'd started sort of looking around in that realm a little bit. And Mark knew that I was interested in it. And then all of a sudden he called me out of the blue one day and he said, I just got this new job. I'm leaving to go to Oregon. And he said, I would like to recommend you to take this job if you're interested in it. And so I got an interview for the job, and I went into the film office, and been there for 25 almost years now.
It's crazy.
So, it is crazy.
And so I just felt like, again, coming from a location background, it was like, okay, I know what these people are looking for. I know how to try and help them solve their problems. If we don't have this particular location, what can we recommend instead? What else can we do? Let's get creative here and see what else we can help you do to solve this problem. So, I like to say we do two different things. We market and recruit the region. We try and get projects to come here, and so that's going to different trade shows where we can interact with folks. It's going to different conferences and festivals. It's making trips to Los Angeles where we just go and see folks at Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and CBS and NBC and go and sit and have meetings with them.
Yep.
And talk to them, let them know what's going on here with crew, sound stages, incentives. And then once they're here, we sort of go into what I'll call just concierge mode. And we're here to just sort of take care of whatever the problem is that may come up.
Yeah.
Whether it's your hair and makeup artist was on the way to set this morning and they were going 100 miles an hour down MLK and they got taken into jail, and now your lead actor is not going to come on the set if your hair and makeup artist is not there. So who do we call? We call Johnny Griffin.
Johnny Griffin,
and say, we got a problem.
Yeah.
You've got a producer that steps off an airplane that's never been here before. They're getting ready to spend $50-60 million, and they're in a strange town with people they don't know.
Yep.
And so somebody's got to kind of be their advocate, and somebody's got to sort of be on their side, and somebody that they feel like that they can trust. And so we're there to provide that for them and try and make sure that they have a great experience where when they leave here, they may say, you know what, I'd never been to Wilmington before and I didn't know what to expect, but now, you know what, I want to go back.
Yeah.
And I want to shoot my next project there because the people are great, the town is great.
And I want to stay at the beach.
There are other places where producers work, and it's just a job. Right. I'm not going to name any cities, but some big cities south of us where they make a lot of movies. And
yeah.
Producers that go there, and you're there just because that's where the job is. But it's not necessarily a place that you look forward to going back to again.
No.
But here, I sit down with every producer before they leave town and talk to them, and say, tell us what the community did right. Tell us what the community did wrong.
That's brilliant.
Tell us what we need to work on.
Sure.
And you would be surprised, and these are the top-level producers, and you'd be surprised at the number of them that say, you know what, now that I've worked here, I know the crews, they're great, I know the community, and I would like to come back and work again. So if you ever find a project that doesn't have a producer attached, please call me and let me know.
Oh, wow.
And these same producers will check in with me 1, 2, 3, 4 months down the road and say, hey, just following back up with you, are there any studios or anybody you're talking to about projects that you'd like for me to go try and see if I can get that and bring it to Wilmington and maybe I can actually be on that project, because they just want to come back here and work with these crews.
So this is the very first show I was on Weeds. And like I said earlier, I was driving, and it was Christmas break, and I was tasked with coming to the studio and grabbing a car to pick up Nick Nolte, his young wife Becky, and their newborn infant, and to take them back to their beach house at Wrightsville Beach. Dino had rented them a house right next to his house at Wrightsville, and everyone else was off because it was Christmas break and they were just getting back in. So I went to the studio, and they were coming in late at night. And I went to the studio to try to find some car keys from one of the rental cars, and I couldn't find any keys. There were 3 picture cars that we had on that show that we used all the time. There was an old camper trailer.
I remember that.
There was a Jeep.
Yep.
And there was what we called the Pimp Mobile.
Oh, I remember the Pimp Mobile.
Yeah. It was purple. I don't know whether it was a Lincoln. I don't know whether it was a Continental or a Cadillac, but it was purple. It had the dice on the mirror.
I think it had curb feelers on it.
It had like shag carpet interior, and the only thing I could think to do, I couldn't take him in the Jeep, and I sure couldn't take him in that old camper. So I grabbed the keys to the Pimp Mobile, and I took off for the airport.
And this is late at night.
Yes, this is late at night, and this is the first show I ever worked on. No one was around. It was Christmas break. I didn't know what to do. So, and that was back in the day when you picked up your luggage. You know, you got out of the airport and you picked up your luggage outside.
That's right.
The luggage carousel was outside in the weather, and it didn't even
wasn't a carousel.
Yeah, it wasn't a carousel. It was
shelf.
It was a shelf, right? So I pull up in the Pimp Mobile, and they come walking out of the airport, and she's got the baby's only like a few weeks old. It's tiny. It's tiny. And I say, I'm here to pick you guys up and take you to your beach house. And they go, okay, and I said, well, let's go get your luggage. And the wind was whipping. It was bitter, bitter cold. And so I gather up all their luggage, and we walk to the Pimp Mobile. And, of course, he's familiar with the car. And he's like, what the hell are we doing? And I was like, it's the only car we have. So I put him in the car, and I drive him to the beach, and we pull up to the house. Well, during Christmas break, Dino had the house painted.
Okay.
So that's an important thing because the painters locked. Nick had a key to the deadbolt, but he did not have a key to the knob. And the painters locked the doorknob when they were done and left. So we're out there, it's 11 o'clock at night, the wind is whipping off the ocean. She's got the baby, and it starts to cry, just crying. And Nick fumbles with his keys, and he unlocks the deadbolt, but he can't, he's still locked. He goes, what the hell? And I go, okay, so I go around to the ocean front thinking, well, maybe the sliding glass door is open, but no, it had one of those ubiquitous broom handles, right, that you jam in there to keep people like me from opening up the sliding glass door.
Otherwise, It was unlocked, though, wasn't it?
Yeah. Sure.
You could jiggle it real good.
So I come back around. Meanwhile, the baby's crying louder, and she's getting nervous and upset, and Nick's getting all flustered. I check any number of windows and everything, and I come around to the other side, and he's like, what is it? And I'm like, okay, let me think for a second. So then I reach into my pocket, and I pull out my wallet, and I take a credit card out of my wallet, and I stick it in the door jamb, and I work it, and in about 10 seconds, I pop the lock, and I open the door, and he goes, damn, how'd you do that? And I looked right at him and I said, I saw it in the movies. True story.
Bravo. All right. The Griffin brothers. Thank you so much for coming today.
It was a
Yeah,
blast.
thank you,
Thanks.
Scott. It was great.
I mean, really, some great stories. And again, just wanting to capture.
Rap Beer is created and written by Scott Davis and John D. Kretschmer. The music is by Turbo Pro Project. This one-of-a-kind podcast is recorded at the historic screening room at CineSpace Studios in Wilmington, North Carolina. Copyright Bluffco Industry, 2024.